there's a lot of thoughts that are coming in, Aya. So I'm gonna do my best to kind of condense some of that stuff, kind of put it towards maybe some thoughts or questions that are similar. But one that came in, and you can hear me okay, right, Aya?
Yes, I can.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. One that came in says this: cultural Marxism or critical theory seems to have become the new boogeyman in white Christian circles. How do we respond to the pushback against these theories?
It's a tough question to answer because, again, these theories are being advanced by people that we otherwise would esteem within the Christian tradition, and people that a lot of them have really big, large platforms. So for those who are wondering what the whoever asked the question may be talking about, I just wanted to give a little description about this whole cultural Marxism thing. So let me use an example of Pat Buchanan. What he's saying is that it's being used to de-Christianize America. And so that the more that we're talking about really issues of equality, what we're trying to do is to take away Christianity from America. And all that I can say in response to that is people have always used the Bible to back up whatever theories that they have. You can find a verse, if you look hard enough, you can find a verse that will back up whatever you want to say, or whatever you want to advance. As one who reads the Bible for myself, I'm getting further and further away from just listening to what so-called men and women of God with political aspirations or whatever other agendas they have may be trying to do. And I'm truly invested in spending more one-on-one time with God to hear directly for myself. And that's the only thing that I at this point can encourage other Christians to do, is that so many of us have gotten away from that personal relationship with God, and it's so easy then to be manipulated by people and their interpretation of things in the Bible and so on and so forth. But I do believe that God is still in the business of speaking directly to his people. And that's what I do, is I really just try to close my ears to those things that do not resonate with the Spirit of God within me. And it requires a lot of quiet. I've actually done more fasting and more Bible study since I left the church than when I was in the church, and I could just depend on, well, I'll just go on Sunday and get my little shot of whatever, the pastor has to offer. And please, pastors, I'm not criticizing you. I'm just saying that this is supposed to be a one-on-one relationship as well with God. We're supposed to be relating directly with God ourselves. And whether we're talking about cultural Marxism or any other theories out there, they can all be debunked if we're really hearing from the Holy Spirit ourselves, as opposed to just following whatever theories may be out there in the world. And that may or may not answer your question, but that's what I got for you.
That's good. It's good. I think this one's great. Someone's asking, what are some suggestions you would have for someone who's not Black or white Christians to be doing during this time of racial tension, specifically in 2020 and the Black Lives Matter movement?
Great question. So I actually didn't get to that slide. It was the very last slide, but I'm going to send everything to you, Robbie, and so you can disseminate it to whoever wants it. But the very last slide actually has a list of resources. So I think, getting educated is important. Just knowing what you don't know, or at least the extent that you can be a little bit more informed. And then I would say truly research in your community. Right there in San Diego, there are organizations that need people. There are organizations that need resources. Even attending school board meetings and speaking up for those kids whose parents cannot be there or don't have the wherewithal to be able to advocate for them. Paying attention to what your city councils are doing. Whenever policies or rules or things that you have a say come to your desk or come around, or just in your community, really looking at it just not from your lens of what's in it for me, but saying, how does this affect maybe that family that makes half of what I make? Or how does this affect that child who is, comes from a single parent home? How does this, like in this time of COVID, how is virtual learning affecting those kids who are in such cramped quarters? Today, we started school in my area, and I have 5 children at home, a college student, a senior in high school, a sophomore, an 8th grader, and a 6th grader. And our bandwidth is bad to begin with because we're a little bit out in the rural area. It was a nightmare. Oh, and my husband is doing telemedicine as well here in the house. So all these devices, and my daughter comes like, keep getting kicked off. And I'm thinking, we can even afford Wi-Fi. It's horrible, but we can afford it. What happens to those kids who can't even afford that, or who don't have homes large enough? These kids were actually in individual rooms and still complaining about, I can hear her through the wall. I'm like, what is happening to poorer kids in this time of COVID? So when you ask me, what can you do? Be that good Samaritan. Be that one who's looking out to say, who's hurting around me? And what can I do about it? Where are the areas in San Diego where there are food deserts? How do I advocate for those people? That's what I would say you need to do. Like, we need to really just start paying more attention to just more than just what affects us personally.
And I would add to that, like, I feel personally interested for other people that might be interested at church that want to join me. Like, please call me, send me a message. Like, I'm interested in learning more about local organizations and things we can do locally too. So, I need to research it more too. So it's good that we're asking questions.
Yeah, I thought someone brought up a great question, a great concept. Just saying that, there might be people that say our church isn't really set up to be the champion of racial injustice, that maybe this isn't our fight, that maybe what we're fighting is maybe not the most important, or there's other important fights. Is there anything you would say to that kind of mentality, or just kind of framing it and seeing it that way?
I would pull up that quote from Martin Luther King. If you're silent, you're complicit. And I know it sucks, right? Because trust me, there are areas where I too am looking and saying, I need to be doing more in this area. And the fact that I'm comfortable and it doesn't affect me is not a reason to say I'm not set up to do it. So there is a resource that I'll be sharing with your team that shows what some other churches have done. Churches who have said, hey, our church, and your church is actually racially diverse, but churches that have said, hey, we're pretty monolithic here in terms of race, and this other church down the road is pretty monolithic. How can we figure out how to work together and maybe have conversations? So it doesn't have to be, we are the church, right? So it just doesn't have to be, LifeBridge on its own as this silo, right? It could be LifeBridge plus, and together all these churches, all these believers coming together and making a difference. So for us to just say, well, I don't think we're set up for it. Well, you know what? Then get set up. Because if you're not set up to bring about justice, then you are actively supporting injustice. And guess what? When we talk about racism, a lot of times the conversation centers around, those poor African Americans, or if it's another group, maybe Latinos or whatever, those poor people, it must be, I can't imagine living in your shoes, right? I get that all the time. And I get, quite frankly, a little irritated. I don't want your pity. Because there's another way to look at this racism, and that is, what impact does it have on the person who is actually perpetrating the racism against someone else? Like, what's going on a soul level with you? What's going on psychologically that you, to feel good about yourself, have to put someone else down? To feel safe, you have to demonize other people. Like, what is going on with you? And then if you're a Christian, how do you really expect to enter into the gates of heaven with that kind of heart? So I'm asking my brothers and sisters in Christ, what is the condition of your heart? Like, clearly we've dealt with this racism and somehow we keep living through it. But if I suffer here and quote unquote go to heaven later versus you had a good life here, but you end up in hell, if that's what we believe, was it worth it? So there's a psychological impact, so, you know, on white people who are buying into this notion of white supremacy and white privilege. And let me tell you, when I saw those white men in Charlottesville, Virginia, marching with those tiki torches and "we will not be replaced," that is a deep-rooted fear, right? These are people who have clung to this sense of I'm superior, and then when the field is starting to it's not even leveled, we're just starting to try and get a few rights. Listen, Black people didn't even ask for equal rights. They asked for civil rights. Think about that. I mean, things were so bad that they were like, let's not even talk equality. We'll get nowhere. We'll be dead in the water. Let's just talk about civil rights. And so with us just talking civil rights, you're already feeling so threatened that you're going to be displaced. That means that somewhere deep inside of you, you know that what you're believing is not really the truth. But then again, does it not stunt you from being the best you that you could be? Listen, I look at this in so many different ways, and I'm saying, white America, you guys are hurting just as bad. Let's not even talk about the whites' guilt. I have a nonprofit organization that works with girls ages 10 through 18, and girls from all backgrounds, but the majority of the girls we serve are African American and Latino. And I can't tell you the number of times I will go and talk to a fellow white Christian, and I know that the reason they've given me money is out of sheer guilt. That's a horrible way to live. Like, give me out of love. Give me because you believe in the work I'm doing. But if it's just that, well, you know, I don't want to be seen as one of those racist white people, so I'll write you a check. That's a horrible way to live. So if you're not set up for the, you know, if you're not set up to advance justice, go get set up, is what I'll say.
Well, there's one that has a couple questions in it and some comments to it too, but I'll do my best to kind of paraphrase. They're basically talking about how you see around the world, you see different people, Africans, that have very different experiences as far as wealth or growth. And so there is still, their quote says, African Americans are by far the most prosperous Black people in the world, despite historic discrimination. So Africans still dream of migrating to Europe or to the US. What would you say kind of about that understanding, or what does that mean in the framing of white Americans and knowing how to address that or how to understand that? So hopefully I'm framing that okay from what they're trying to understand.
Okay, so, and I may be hearing that incorrectly, and if I am, please respond, you know, in the Q&A again and get me back on track. So there's always been this mindset of, well, we really did the Africans that we enslaved a huge favor because we saved them from Africa, and now they've been able to be civilized and they have all these access to opportunity in America, and so we really did them a favor. And of course, the proof is that you have all these Africans who are coming over to take advantage of the opportunities here because we're the most amazing country on earth. And that's what I'm getting from that question, you know, that, hey, African Americans are very prosperous. Well, this country is, or when you don't add all our trillions of debt, we are the most prosperous nation in the world. And so it would stand to reason for me that if you are here, that you will be one of the richest people in the world. If we compare any group that's here in the United States to groups somewhere else, we are by far incredibly wealthy. And that shouldn't be different for African Americans. If anything, it should be, they should be wealthier than they are. If we talk about reparations and what African Americans are owed for their labor and for their intellectual property, we can go from Elvis Presley to, gosh, talk about so many different inventions that we just did not get credit for, and we did not make the money from that, did not have that access. So in that respect, I would say, yes, it's the richest nation in the world, and it absolutely makes sense that Africans who live here, African Americans, would be richer than Africans somewhere else. Having said that, can we go back and think for a second to those slides that I showed you to begin with? That an African American family with a college degree has less of a median net worth than a white family with a high school diploma. So don't tell me, well, they're doing better than the Africans in Africa. So even though we are robbing them blind and we're mistreating them here, it's not that bad because it's still better over there. That's one argument. The second thing I would say is, hello, how do you think America got as rich as it is? Listen, if I today could go somewhere and get 500 acres of land for free, right? And get free labor to build whatever I want and use that labor for hundreds of years, and I can use that income then to really oppress groups of other, from other lands, decide what their raw material is worth, undervalue it, bring it here, process it, sell it back to them at much higher levels, I would be incredibly wealthy as well. So one of the books that I would tell whoever asked that question to read, two books I would tell you to read how Europe underdeveloped Africa, and what's the second one? It also has to deal with the underdevelopment of Africa. When I send you the slides, I'll make sure that I add those two books into it as well. And so when you look at the continent of Africa, we are still supporting Europe. We are still supporting the United States of America. When we talk about Firestone and their tires, and you find out that when they went to Liberia, they were able to lease thousands of acres of the best land for $1 for years, and that the original owners of the land were driven off the land and have not been able to partake in any of the wealth from all the rubber that their labor produces, but which has helped Firestone to become the company it became in America. Or when we talk about the oil companies, or I can name 100 European-based and American companies that are even today siphoning wealth out of Africa. And it's as a result of what they're doing that Africa is as impoverished as it is. By the way, the same thing is happening in Latin America. And that's why you see so many people migrating, because we've decimated other people's economies and they are coming here looking for respite. Unfortunately, many of us get here and realize we may have just gone from the frying pan to the fire. In the case of my family, like I said, my parents moved back to Nigeria. My 7 siblings, at one point, we were all here. We all have, degrees and work hard, and many of us are entrepreneurs. My oldest sister has moved back. My brother has moved back. My younger sister has moved back to Nigeria. Even with the economic advancement here, all the other isms that you deal with just wasn't enough to make sense anymore. They've decided to go back and to figure out how to build up our economies on the continent of Africa. And God has me here for now for some work that I'm doing. But whenever I get that green light to leave, I'll be leaving too, seriously. And that's a conversation that increasingly African Americans are having, is how do we check out of here? So hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you kind of taking my best attempt at pulling that together. But I also think I just hear you saying, it doesn't matter where it's at, the opportunities or what that is from country to country, if it's still not equal, if it's still oppressive, it's still damaging. It doesn't make it a wash. It doesn't make it something we can't worry about, or any reason for it to be less important. So I think that's huge. Yeah, there's just so much to that. Is it okay? Well, I know we're past the 8 o'clock, but we still got a good number of 30 people or so.
I'm here.
Is it okay if I ask a question or two more? Okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Aya. One is that how would you define systemic racism, and how much of our system is still racist versus the implementation of the system by broken or racist individuals?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I was thinking, oh, I didn't define racism at any time, and I didn't really talk about systemic racism, even though I talked about it by showing the history, just this long lineage of since the inception of this nation, how we have used systems and laws in the government, in the church, in every institution we've had to enforce this caste system, to enforce this, sense of one race is superior to the other. So how would I define racism? I know that Merriam-Webster dictionary was just challenged to change their definition of racism, and it differs from author to author. But basically, when we talk about systemic racism, we are talking about the oppression, the marginalization of a group of people, of a person or a group of people, based solely on these racial distinctions, which we know are man-made constructs, but which are undergirded by systems. It's not just, oh, someone called me the N-word and we're equal in every other way, but they called me the N-word. They go their way, I go my way. Yes, that's prejudice, and that was, horrible and shouldn't have been said, but it's beyond that. It's the fact that there's systems in place that actually are set up to provide access to resources and opportunities to one race in a way that it shuts out other people. So let's look at the legal system, for instance. One of the things that the Black Lives Movement is asking for is criminal justice reform. Some of you may have heard of the case where a young man stole a pair of hedge clippers, and it's his third crime, all of them for like less than $50, something along those lines. And the Supreme Court in that state is upholding a life sentence for him. Like, where is the justice in that? This person has not murdered anybody. It wasn't an assault. It wasn't life. I mean, for a pair of clippers. And how much do we pay to incarcerate that person? However, if we incarcerate them, the 13th Amendment now allows us access to their labor at free to like no money, really, because institutions like Walmart can now go and hire this person for pennies on the dollar to produce products that the rest of us can now buy, quote unquote, cheaply, while the Waltons make money hand over fist, even in their sleep. And somehow we think they're the good people, and this is the American way, and it's entrepreneurship and capitalism and all of that. But look at what we're doing and how we're going about it. So the whole question about systemic racism is really not just having that prejudice based on race, but it's having it embedded in the very systems, whether it's our education system. In my community, our school district is 75% students of color, and the top administrators in our school district are all white. We are not even at a place where we can actively have a voice in how the education of our students is set up because of systemic racism. And so the systemic part of the racism is, it's not just prejudice, it's not just this belief of one race being superior, but it's being able to take that and embed it into just about really all of our institutions, including the church, that allows it to proliferate and makes it really incredible for the people being discriminated against to ever overcome it. So you talk about LeBron James, right? Multi-millionaire. Most of us have heard of him. He's still getting his house spray painted. He's still having the conversation I'm having with my son about keep your hand at 10 and 12. If you get pulled over, you know, call, keep us on speakerphone or do Facebook Live. But whatever happens, don't raise your voice. Don't ask questions. Just create like you're second-class citizens. I mean, the extent to which racism is systemic in America. Have you guys heard of the Crown Act? In 2019, 2020, we are actually advocating and having to go state legislature by state legislature to get bills passed that allow African American women to wear their hair in their natural state. Because certain courts have ruled that with the way I wear my hair, I happen to have locks, that I can be denied a job because of how I wear my hair. What does this have to do with me doing my job? So we are actually and we're supposedly citizens of this country, but you talk about systemic racism. We are actually having to ask legislatures to pass laws to say you cannot discriminate against us because we are wearing our hair the way God made it to grow. That I don't have to go and buy chemicals and damage my hair to fit in to be able to get a job and to provide for my family. Isn't that ridiculous? I mean, even when we talk about right now in the Senate and Congress saying they need to reauthorize the Voter Rights Act. If African Americans were not dealing with systemic racism, since we're citizens, why can't we all just vote? Why do we need a Voter Rights Act reinstated, well, I think it's every 10 years, just so that our state legislators don't go and gerrymander and close polling areas and prevent us from having access to voting as citizens? I mean, white Americans, do you guys ever ask yourself that question? Why do we need a Voter Rights Act? Why did we need a Civil Rights Act? And when people tell me, well, I'm not sure how to fight racism, I'm like, how about you just be human? Like, what you want is what everybody else wants. You want a safe neighborhood? God knows that's what I want. You want your money to stretch as far as it can? That's what I want. I don't want to be charged extra because I live in a certain zip code, which my parents were charged and ended up getting, they didn't even know. Fifth Third Bank ended up having to do this settlement. But at that point, the damage has been done because the settlement was worth nothing. And then the attorneys take most of it. So long-winded answer, but yes, racism is not just what an individual does, it's the power of the system behind them as well.
Thank you, Aya. There's a few questions and then just personally an ongoing conversation in my own family with friends about the Black Lives Matter movement, and people specifically finding out, you know, the leaders are trained in Marxism, or they oppose traditional families, or those kind of details. So how do we process the organization versus the movement, or how are we supposed to understand that in this time?
I don't know that I have the answer to that question. I would say this, what the Black Lives Movement organizers are doing is incredibly brave, because anytime you move against this system, you get crushed. And many of those leaders from Ferguson, where Mike Brown was killed, have mysteriously turned up dead in burning cars, bullets in their heads. Really, like, this is happening in this day and age. So first and foremost, I just applaud their courage, because although I've attended a few protests, I'm always still like, okay, what's my exit? And, you know, all of that. I'm not out there like totally ready to die just yet in that way. I mean, if God says it's my time, it's my time. Having said that, I think that what we're seeing happen with the Black Lives Movement is similar to what we saw happen with the NAACP in the 1930s. Where the government characterized them as communists. And there was this big to-do about, you know, those communists are going to tear down our country and they're going to change life as we know it, and we need to oppose them. And no, the issue wasn't communism, and the issue right now is not Marxism. The issue is white supremacy and how it oppresses other people, and right now how it's oppressing African Americans. Everything else, I think, is just a smokescreen. The Black Lives Movement within the Black community is controversial. There are Black men who are very concerned about the Black Lives Movement because it was created by Black women, many of whom are identify as LGBTQ. For me, I would say this to the Christian church: what destroys us doesn't come from the outside, it's what's on the inside, right? What's going to destroy traditional families is not what Black Lives Matter is saying or not saying or doing. It's how we are raising our children and the hypocrisy our children see in our own marriages and in our own families. That's what's going to destroy our families. It's not any outward thing, right? So my kids are not going to be like, oh my God, the Black Lives Matter said we oppose traditional family, so we oppose traditional family. No, if my children decide to oppose traditional family, it's going to be because they were so disgusted by what they saw in their own family and around them that made them say, you know what, is there an alternative? So that's my take on it. Everything else is a smokescreen. But if we study history, every group that has really tried to fight for rights and fight against oppression has been labeled, has been infiltrated, has been destroyed. The FBI did it with every civil rights organization, and definitely with the Black Panther movement. In fact, with the Black Panther movement was the only time the NRA ever opposed the rights of citizens to carry guns, because suddenly members of the Black Panthers were out in California with guns. By the way, they started these breakfast programs that we now have for kids all over the schools in the United States. But they're like, we have a right to bear arms. And as soon as they started bearing arms, remember the presentation I gave you about the slave acts, the slave codes that said Black people can't bear arms. So the minute we have arms, oh, that's a problem. Let's label them with whatever labels. Let's marginalize them. Let's infiltrate them. Let's tear them apart. That's what this nation has always done. It's no different with Black Lives Matter. And I'm telling you, they're fighting against oppression. We may not always like how people do it, but let me ask America, and the white church in particular, what form of protest exactly is palatable to you? Because when Colin Kaepernick took a knee, we were upset. And what did we do? We changed the narrative from he's taking a knee to put a spotlight on police brutality against Black men. We changed that narrative to he's disrespecting the flag. He's disrespecting the anthem. Where did that come from? And then we find out, oh, a veteran told him take a knee. Oh, that's still not good enough. And we made it all about, well, I'm the patriot. I'm standing up for flag. Oh, wait a second. How about all the Black people who fought for this flag and came back to this country and were lynched for having the audacity to ask for civil rights, not equal rights, just civil rights? Where's the outrage about that? Where's the outrage about all this inequality? And so for people who are like, oh, I can't do Black Lives Matter because I heard this or that, listen, find another reason why you don't want to fight oppression. But them, quote unquote, not being in favor of traditional marriage is a joke. And the Black community is not monolithic. So within the Black Lives Movement, you are going to find some people who feel one way, and you're going to find people who feel the other way. There's no one voice that speaks for the entire Black experience, and that is true for the Black Lives Matter movement as well.
If I could just if I could just add to that, I've been reading this really great book that we'll put on the church resource page, which Aya knows. It's called The Color of Compromise. And actually what I was just reading today, like the last chapter of the book talks about, well, what should we be doing? I really recommend the book, but it did address the Black Lives Matter movement, because I was kind of curious too, to learn a little bit more about it. And it did say, it does support, some other very liberal views of groups for equal rights. But it said, different chapters can be very individualized depending on who's the leader of your local group. And he said, some Christians might not be able to, join a group like that, but maybe there's certain events you would want to go to and other ones you wouldn't want to go to. And so it's just kind of interesting the way the Christian author kind of put that. So I thought that was interesting to kind of think about and learn more about.
It's like the church. I mean, there are things when I was in church, there are things that our church did, and wasn't my cup of tea, but it wasn't a deal breaker, and there are things my kids do that I can't stand. I'm not going to throw them away anytime soon.
Well, we'll finish with one last question. And honestly, this question is for me and other leaders at our church. It starts with for church leadership. But I want to just open up that processing with you, Aya. For church leadership, what will you do to lead LifeBridge as a congregation in this fight against racial inequality? And specifically acknowledging that our mission is to build bridges. And I guess what I would tack on to that, since that question was for me, for others in leadership at our church, not to say, Aya, you answer this or just tell me what to do, but more of what would be your encouragement in some of the action steps we can take as a church, or that I can specifically encourage as a leader here at our church.
Well, first and foremost, let me just again say thank you, because like I said, I've been in churches for my whole life, and I've been doing this diversity work for many decades. And even the churches I was a member of never had a forum like this. So I just want to, I love to give credit where it's due. And so I just want to start off by just saying kudos to you all for doing this. Now, I know that there are probably some African-American members of your church who are rolling their eyes at me right now and saying, you don't even know what we're experiencing. I know this because you're still a church in America. And so, and who are saying that they haven't done anything yet. This was it. They should have asked me. I totally get that. I just wanted to start off by commending you, because it does take courage to even have this conversation. And there are lots of people who don't want these conversations to be had. And so sometimes when churches are courageous enough to take this kind of step, they do lose members. By God's grace, I think you can also gain members too, and you can really build a church that reflects God's heart. And that's really what we should be doing. Having said that, I would say that there's a resource that I absolutely 100% recommend for the church leadership. And of course, everybody else who's listening can access this as well. It's a book by John M. Perkins, and it's called One Blood. He wrote it as an 87-year-old, and he just really starts off by saying, this is my manifesto. This is like my last gift to the world. And he was one who had just toiled in the fields for the Lord his entire life. Well, since I think he converted when he was 26 or 27, something like that. So for 6 decades. And had just had his heart broken over and over again by the church's inability, sometimes unwillingness, to address the racial schisms that exist and to address the oppression that exists. But in this book, he details churches and specific pathways and programs that they have incorporated. So it's not a one-night thing or a 3-day or even just a month-long thing. It's like, this is who we are as a church. And these are very specific things that we do over a period of time and always do. So for instance, with their church staff, every time they hire a new church leader, that church leader has to go through training that includes dealing with issues of racism, because their whole point is our leadership sets the tone. And if we have leaders who are leading small groups or worship or, men's ministry, women's ministry, or whatever, and they're quote unquote ignorant or clueless in this area, they could be causing a lot of damage in the body of Christ that we don't even know about until it explodes. They have a whole year-long program that they encourage those members of their congregation who want to learn more, who want to figure out, how can I really show up as God's hands and feet and heart in this world? And so it's like a discipleship program. They have a program called Sankofa where they work with other churches, and they actually go back, like I was trying to share the history, to help people walk through some of the history in their communities and beyond, so that it's not just an academic exercise. It's like you are seen and feeling these things on a whole different level than, oh, I read it in a book or I attended a workshop. So John M. Perkins' book, One Blood, extremely powerful. You can get the book, you can get the audio version of it. I've listened to his book a couple of times, read the hard copy, and every time I'm just encouraged by the work that they, not just he, but a lot of other churches were doing, and how they address just different challenges. There were a lot of barriers to doing this work, but the different ways that the different churches addressed it. So it wasn't a one size fits all. So that's a resource that I would definitely recommend to the church leadership. But I would say that this needs to be ongoing. These issues didn't come about overnight, and we're not going to resolve them overnight. But if you can create an atmosphere in your church where these conversations can, where you create a safe space for these conversations to be had, and for people to work through the emotions. So I was talking with Jody earlier today, and I was saying, just like we have stages of grief, when we talk about addressing these issues, there are going to be times when people are angry. There are going to be times when people are withdrawn. There are going to be times when people are depressed over it. I know I've been through all of those things. And then there are times when you get past that and you're like, okay, who's ready to work? I'm rolling up my sleeves and I'm looking for people to link arms with and work with. And then there are times when things happen to you and you just get, like kicked back to, go back to what does Monopoly say? Go back to start, do not pass, go, do not take 200, whatever. There are times in my life racially where it's like, oh my God, I thought I was past this, and something happens. And then it feels like I have to go through the process again. But each time it gets easier to quickly advance through the stages. And good luck. Y'all are going to need, well, I shouldn't say good luck. I should say, you have God on your side. And if our God be for us,
who's against us? No one.
Thank you, Aya.
Awesome.
Yeah, we got through a lot of the questions, and there's a few more that we didn't get to touch on. But one thing I did hear is a lot of people sending things of, can we talk with you again? So, we might be able to have a chance to be able to spend more time with you. That would be awesome. But I'm going to hand it off to Jody to just finish it off for us.
So I just wanted to remind everybody, there's a follow-up event in 2 weeks that we're going to be having a few people share. So I think Marvin Gross is going to be sharing with us, and Doretha Price, and maybe some other church members too. Just kind of a follow-up to what we thought about tonight. I think I saw a comment too in the chat box that it's a lot to think about, right? And that's why we separated the events actually by a couple weeks, so that people can talk about it. You can contact me, you can contact any of the staff members if you guys have questions or just want to discuss further. I think everybody approaches this in a different way, and I think we always want to just make sure we're approaching each other though, in love, as we keep moving forward in this kind of tricky topic. So thank you so much, Aya. Again, appreciate you so much. I'm just going to pray for us, and then we'll wrap up our meeting. God, I just thank you so much for Aya, and just for her heart for you, and for just the knowledge that she's able to share, and just for her experience and her brain power, Lord. We thank you for that, but we also just thank you so much for her heart for you. And God, I would just pray that all of us that were listening tonight, that we might have learned more about you and your people, Lord, about how we might be able to love on one another better, and just have a better understanding for people that might be different than us in our world. And we love you, Jesus, and we thank you for this time. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.